Welcome to the Voter Protection Corps webinar from April 15th, 2025. Voter Protection in 2025, New Challenges and the Road to Virginia. Our speakers are Justin Levitt, former White House Senior Policy Advisor for Democracy and Voting Rights, Tram Nguyen, Co-Executive Director of New Virginia Majority, and Nico Walker, the Virginia Voter Protection Director for Harris 2024. Our moderator is Quentin Palfrey, the founder of Voter Protection Corps. We begin with Justin Levitt describing the effect and impact of President Trump's executive order on elections issued March 25th, 2025.
So the executive order, I think it's important to remember, important to frame, we are used to this president taking very big swings, and I think big swings that are often illegal, in areas where it's absolutely the case that the president has a lot of power. Things like immigration, things like tariffs, things like federal contracting. And the relevant question is the president using that ginormous amount of federal power correctly? Answer's usually no. But at least the presumption is the president has a lot of power in that arena to begin with. And that's conditioning us, I think, to think that if we see the president take a big swing, then he's got a lot of power in the relevant arena. And the only question is whether he's using it right. And that is not true with respect to the elections executive order. By design, the president has very, very little control in his formal office over the election process. States do, Congress does, independent agencies have a little bit of authority in very discrete ways, but not the president. And I say that as someone who had the privilege of advising the president and who spent a lot of time in that role reiterating what we couldn't do. There's some small stuff in the executive order, and fundamentally, executive orders are just instructions to federal agencies. So there's a small amount of stuff in the president's executive order that the president can do. So the president gets to ask for reports from federal agencies, for example. That's fine. The president gets to enforce or direct his DOJ to prioritize the enforcement of certain real federal crimes. That's fine. The president gets to require Social Security to match information coming to them from state voter files, in part because that's been a statutory requirement very expressly for 20 years. And saying that in an executive order, requiring the Social Security Administration to take these steps, is a little bit like giving a toddler the little plastic steering wheel that you attach to the dashboard so that they get to pretend that they're driving. This is already solidly federal law and doesn't add anything new to what is required in the atmosphere. But those are small things. And the big stuff in the executive order, most of the things that have gotten news attention, is stuff that the president has no authority to do. Things like telling an independent federal agency to require documentary proof of citizenship and to rescind certifications of voting systems. Can't do that. And there are like 3 or 4 different reasons why that's not legal. Things like declaring that ballots cast by election day that arrive after election day are illegal. And I'm sitting right now in California where we've got an awful lot of those, and we're not the only state that's got an awful lot of those. Can't do that either. Things like letting Doge run through the state voter files. Can't do that either. And I am more than happy to get into specifics. I see Jesse's reminding people to put questions in the chat. I'll do the same. I'm happy to answer particular questions about why the president can't do alone any of those things. But the main point is that most of the stuff that the president purported to order in his executive order isn't within his authority any more than if I wrote a note with the very same demands. No state election official would listen to me, and they're under any greater legal obligation to listen to the president when he orders them or purports to order them to do stuff, because that's not a role within his constitutional or statutory power. The headline bit of the executive order, and the thing that I think caught most people's eye, even though there's a fair amount in there, is an unlawful instruction to a federal agency to change the voter registration form in order to require documentary proof of citizenship for everybody who's submitting a federal voter registration form, including online. That's also the headline of the so-called SAVE Act, which is a bill that was just narrowly passed last week by the House of Representatives and is right now heading to the Senate. Now, Congress does have the power to make some law here. Congress does have a role in regulating federal elections. But this particular bill, even if Congress had the power to do it, is a remarkably bad idea. I want to be clear, requiring voters to be citizens, that's fine. And that's something that Congress has done for decades and that every state has done in state elections for decades. Requiring voters to prove that they're citizens, that's where we start running into some trouble. Not for everybody, but for a significant number of people. Because not everyone has proof, documentary proof, that they're a citizen right at their fingertips. We're not a country that generally demands that citizens show their papers. There are people who are citizens who never got birth certificates because you don't emerge from the womb with a birth certificate. That's all part and parcel of a structure that's dependent on regularized hospitals getting information from regularized county agencies. And there are people who were born in this country who didn't go through that process. There are people who are citizens who got birth certificates once, but can't find them and who can't easily get replacements. There are lots and lots and lots and lots of people who are citizens who have birth certificates, but who aren't listed by the name on their birth certificates, including most prominently millions of married women, but not only millions of married women. People change their names all the time for lots of reasons. And the SAVE Act, this thing that just passed Congress and is heading to the Senate, would require people to show up in person with those documents they may or may not have, which effectively ends registration online or by mail, just does away with it. And there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people who don't live right by an official election office, who might live a couple hours away driving from an official election office. We've actually got real data on how these sorts of requirements affect real eligible citizens from a couple states that have experimented. The experiments haven't always gone very well. In Arizona, when they first put in place a law that was very similar to this, just for the state, there were about 30,000 people who were trapped in the registration system, who there was every reason to believe they were citizens. They just didn't have the paperwork to show it readily. And in New Hampshire, there was actually a fairly good amount of coverage recently about New Hampshire's experimentation with a law like this that turned away a lot of eligible citizens at the polls. When they showed up, there was no question they were citizens. They just didn't have the piece of paper to prove it. So this is an experiment that, at least from the states that have implemented similar things so far, is not likely to go well and is not likely to go well at scale. Now, how is all this going to affect entities working on elections, nonprofits and voter registration groups and campaigns and such? The executive order, as I mentioned, is unlawful in about 8 different ways. And there are already a bunch of lawsuits, 5 that I know of, and probably more coming, that are contesting the power under the executive order, likely to be resolved in the courts fairly soon. And the SAVE Act isn't law yet. It was passed by the House, but has not been passed by the Senate. And there's reason to think that a lot of senators either are or will be hesitant to pass this thing because of the impact it's likely to have. But these things don't have to be law to create a lot of uncertainty. And organizations I know are already getting tons of questions from voters, at least voters that have grasped the fact that there are elections coming, including in states like Virginia. And they're getting tons of questions from local election officials, some of whom operate 1 person or 2 people or 3 people offices, right? Not every elections office is filled with 50 people, 30 of whom are lawyers and can figure all this stuff out on their own. And so there are a lot of local election officials who really aren't sure what their responsibilities are, who look at the coverage of this EO or look at the coverage of the SAVE Act and don't know what they have to do. And there are going to be some states that run with the ideas in the executive order or the ideas in the SAVE Act in the meantime. that are going to change their own laws. And that's going to require a lot of work from organizations on the ground. So, what is it you can do in this arena? First, exactly what you're doing now, stay informed and engaged. The more you know about what's going on in this area, the more empowered you are to help. Second, work with organizations like the Voter Protection Corps to help inform elections officials and inform the public to tell people what their real roles and responsibilities are and what they don't have to listen to because it's just illegal. And in states running with the idea on their own, or if any of this becomes law in the future, there's going to be an awful lot of work with voter protection organizations to help limit the damage. For example, to help voters who don't have the documents they need get the documents they need and to work through the bureaucracy in making sure that the eligible voters are actually able to not only get registered, but stay registered in time for the next coming elections. That is just a real brief overview of the executive order and the SAVE Act. I know there's a lot more where that came from, but I also want to make sure that we have time to deliver you into the hands of some of our local experts who explain to you the stakes of this and other issues that are hitting the ground in Virginia.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Justin. So as I mentioned, we'll have time for a question and answer portion of this conversation. If you have questions for Justin about the SAVE Act, about the executive order, about the national landscape, please put them in the chat. Put the word ask and then the question, and Jesse Littlewood, our executive director, my colleague at Voter Protection Corps, will help tee up those questions during the question and answer session. I wanted to turn now to Virginia, I mentioned, sort of struggling with what to do about this moment. I think that we are all sort of overwhelmed with the news, with the attacks on our democracy and the rule of law. And I think we think about how can we effectively stand up for our democracy in this moment. And I think that the answer that we're coming up with at the Voter Protection Corps is really to think concretely about the elections that are in front of us. We've started to see in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race and some of the races in Florida, we're starting to see some lessons from what elections are going to be like in this administration. But the really big fight in 2025 is going to be in the Virginia gubernatorial race. There's also going to be a gubernatorial race in New Jersey. And these are incredibly important elections from a couple of standpoints. They're very important in their own right. They are also canaries in the coal mine. They are a way of seeing the direction that we are going to be heading in this voter protection environment, the challenges, the threats to democracy. They're going to be proving grounds for the voter protection strategies that we're going to be able to employ. And one of the things that the Voter Protection Corps has long advocated is early intervention. Now is not too early to be working on November's elections. And so to learn about the landscape of the Virginia elections, we are very lucky to be joined by two wonderful voter protection leaders in Virginia. The first is Tram Nguyen, the co-executive director of the new Virginia Majority, who leads the work of the C3 and C4 voting rights community, as well as Nico, who was the voter protection director in Virginia for the Harris-Wallace campaign, as well as the Virginia Democratic Party lead for voter protection over the last little bit. Tram and Nico, I'm looking forward to hearing your insights on the importance of the Virginia elections. One of the things we heard, we had a seminar or webinar last month with some leaders from Arizona and Georgia and Wisconsin who really highlighted this importance of year-round and advanced work. And so we'd love to start with the question of, what did we learn looking back in the last couple of cycles, and what can we be doing now? What are we looking forward to with the Virginia election? So I'll turn it over to Tram first.
Thanks, Quentin, and thank you for having me on tonight, and thank you all for joining us. Every time I get an opportunity to talk about voter protection and election protection, it's my heart's work. I've been co-executive director of New Virginia Majority since 2007, and have been in Virginia on the front lines of expanding voting rights. Very proud to have worked with the General Assembly to pass the slate of bills that have moved Virginia from being 49th in the country in terms of access to voting in 2020 to now 11th in the nation. So we have a lot of work to be proud of. And at the same time, there's a lot more work that we have to do, right? As Quentin mentioned, and as some folks in the chat have also mentioned, Virginia has elections this year that are very, very, very important, and could be, I always say Virginia has elections every year and use our off-year elections as a petri dish to, try to understand what strategies and tactics might work to engage constituents and engage voters, and also make sure that folks have the ability to actually cast a ballot freely and fairly. So we have our gubernatorial election this year. New Jersey has one too. All three of our statewide offices, state elected offices, are up for election. Our governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. I am of the mindset that the attorney general race is actually our most critical statewide race. I mean, the governor is important, don't get me wrong, but in this political environment and everything that is happening, attorneys generals are playing a big significant role in terms of making sure that we maintain a rule of law and we maintain, our legal structure and apparatus. So those are three very important elections. And we have all 100 of our House of Delegates up for election, as well as a bunch of local races, including some local prosecutor races. So we have a lot of work to do. And in fact, voting starts in Virginia. We have some Republican and Democratic primaries, and voting starts here in less than 4 weeks. So we get an election season and not just an election day. So we have 45 days of early voting, which means that we start now. Election protection starts right now, making sure that across the Commonwealth, if you're voting in either of these primaries, that you are able to cast your ballot. And we are monitoring to make sure that our local registrars, our local election officers, our poll workers, everybody has the resources they need to administer these elections. And as things pop up, as voters go to vote to cast their ballot, whether in person or they are dropping off their ballot in the mail or in a drop box, that we are monitoring to sort of see what is coming up as we think about the general election and being prepared for all of that. We have a long-standing tradition of doing voter protection in Virginia. As I said, I've been doing this myself personally for about 18 years. We have an election every year, so there's an election protection program every year. In years past, it used to just look like poll monitoring, like having volunteers out on the polls, monitoring to see if there were any questions or issues that people ran into as they were trying to cast a ballot. And in the last 5 or so years, I will say that our voter protection efforts have become a lot more year-round. It starts like in January and ends, even post-election day in many ways. We have our legislative session where we're advocating for a lot of fixes, again, that moved Virginia from 49th to now 11th in the nation. We're thinking about, having conversations with local registrars to sort of see where the gaps are, if they need resources to be able to administer elections. I know last year, for example, in the state budget, I advocated and got $2 million put into the state budget to make sure that every locality in Virginia could transition from some of the paper poll books that they were using to electronic poll books, right? To make the checking in process a lot smoother. Also making sure that every locality in Virginia had access to funds from the state to modernize their systems, their ballot marking systems, making sure that we could, have ballot on demand, for example, as an option, as more and more folks were turning out to vote in person, especially during the early voting period, that we have enough ballots for people to actually be able to cast the ballots that they're trying to vote on. And so like our work around election protection isn't just like, making sure on election day people are able to vote without, free of harassment and everything else, but it's how do we actually make sure that our elections are administered freely and fairly, and that our folks who do the tremendous work of actually administering these elections have the resources they need. What it's looked like right now in the last couple of years is some of this early monitoring work has been making sure that we have enough eyes and ears on the ground around the clock at local electoral board meetings. As more and more of these electoral board meetings are considering things like closing polling locations, reducing polling hours during the early voting period, we need to be able to have folks there in these meetings to not only, make public comment and push back, but also to inform us that these things are happening across the state. So we might be able to think about interventions that we could engage in to make sure that those places don't actually close, or that we're, advocating at the local level to county boards and city councils to make sure that these things aren't happening. We've been having great success around that. So there's always a need to have bodies on the ground monitoring these local electoral board meetings. It's how we found out last year in Waynesboro that the local electoral board was going to not certify the election results, which would have caused a whole ripple effect in terms of, Virginia's election results, certification, and all of the other things. And so we were able to engage in litigation to sue the Waynesboro Electoral Board members and force them to certify the election results, and worked with local citizens with standing in the city of Waynesboro. And so there's a reason why the early monitoring and year-round work is super important, so that we can think about some of these interventions that are going to be really important. Things that we're looking out for this year that have popped up more recently: voter challenges. We've seen it in places like Georgia, Arizona. I've spent a good amount of time in Arizona and Georgia. Voter challenges and list maintenance, encouraging third-party organizations going to local registrars, handing them a list of 10,000 voters saying, we don't believe these voters should be on the voter rolls, we're challenging them. And local registrars sometimes don't have the tools they need to push back, or currently, frankly, there isn't a state law that prevents local registrars from actually taking those lists and doing something with it. We try to get that fixed. We passed a bill, got it to Governor Youngkin's desk. He vetoed it. So we got some work to do. But those are things that we're monitoring, right? Making sure that people are not unfairly purged from our voter rolls. And so we're checking on a regular basis what challenges are popping up in localities that would result in some of these purges, getting ready for litigation if we need to make sure that people can stay on the rolls. So yeah, I'll stop there because I know I've said a lot. I know Nico probably has more that he wants to say, and then we can sort of go into Q&A.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Tram. And so I will turn it over to Nico to build on some of the great work that Tram highlighted. Nico?
Yeah, thank you so much, Quentin. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you to the Voter Protection Corps for convening this great meeting this evening. It's really, really important work, and I'm super excited and honored to join. So thank you all for joining. I'm Nico Walker. Prior to attending Harvard Law School, I served as an educator in underserved communities first in Teach for America in Hawaii, and then in the Peace Corps in Rwanda. And I'm super passionate about voter protection. I love the chance to educate and engage citizens in the democratic process and build trust in that process while doing so. And voter protection, in my opinion, is one of the most important things we can be doing right now. So again, thank you all for your interest in it and continuing to build on it for this year. In terms of our program last year, I was really, really proud, and I see a lot of friendly faces there in the audience, which are great to see. Really, really proud to run a strong program with a full spectrum voter protection program, from poll observing through the 45 days of early vote, as Tram said, as well as on election day. We have a strong ballot cure program, a strong voter protection hotline, and one of the kind of flagships that I'm super proud of and excited to talk about today is our voter protection liaison program. As some of you probably know, voter protection is an election administration is highly decentralized in Virginia. There's 133 localities, which are independent cities and counties, and so each of those have an electoral board and have a registrar to run the elections. And so part of the idea with the voter protection liaisons, if any of you are on here tonight, you really are the heart and soul of the program. Part of the idea there is to engage folks on that local level, as Tram mentioned before, attending those local electoral board meetings, making sure folks are having access to the polls. Polling places aren't getting closed. Sunday voting isn't being taken away from voters who need it. And that's a big, big part of the local liaison effort, is to create a sustainable voter protection infrastructure that can survive the boom and bust cycles that we see in campaign world. So in terms of what we did, not only those poll observing programs, not only the ballot cure, but as Tram referenced, also we saw big voter purges in 24 and in 23. We saw alleged non-citizens being purged as a result of Governor Youngkin's Executive Order 35. And then in 2023, we saw around 6,000 eligible Virginia voters purged due to mistakenly being classified as having a felony conviction. As you probably know, Virginia is one of the only few states in the nation that has permanent felon disenfranchisement. And that issue, showed up in 23 as well. And that's why it's so important to have folks on the ground monitoring and reporting out these issues in real time. In terms of some of the big challenges we saw last cycle, we saw, unfortunately, intimidation, up to including physical intimidation at the polling places. That's exacerbated by the fact that Virginia is an open carry state. And so we're really seeing aggressive efforts to deter folks from exercising their right to vote. We saw election subversion. We saw registrars being terminated due to political reasons, as well as the rolling back of voting sites and hours. We saw big turnover in election officials. It's a difficult job. Burnout is a thing, even in states that don't have elections every single year. And then you add in this climate of threats, intimidation, harassment, and folks are just, it's not worth it at a certain point. So we're seeing tons of election officials leave the profession. That has a profound effect on election administration, specifically on, we have same-day registration in Virginia, but a lot of the newer election officials, it's taking them a long time to administer. So we were seeing big, big lines, especially in college campuses. William and Mary in 2023, we saw 3-hour lines during an off year just for registering during that same-day process. Mass voter challenges, Tram mentioned, and then also the certification concerns. So those are some of the big challenges that we saw last cycle and before that. And then quickly turning to 25, it's really hard to understate the impact that the governor's race will have on election administration in Virginia. Through a quirk of the Virginia Code, the party that controls the governor's office controls every single step of election administration, from the state board to the Department of Elections to every single local electoral board. So Fairfax County has 1.2 million residents. That's controlled 2-to-1 by Republicans, as is every local electoral board in Virginia. So if we have the party that controls in 25 will control those election administration for the next 4 years. So it's really hard to overstate. I might have to disagree with you, Tram, about the importance there, but I see your point. But it's incredibly important, and you all know that. Where we are now, I have to say, I am a little bit concerned, as Quentin said, about the boom and bust cycle that we're in voter protection. Tram's involved in amazing efforts as well. But, in terms of partisan space, it's my understanding there's currently no voter protection staff at the Democratic Party of Virginia or the Spanberger campaign that I'm aware of. And so it's really, really important. And I really thank and appreciate Quentin and Jesse for stepping up to the plate and catalyzing all the energy and momentum and expertise we have in this meeting and throughout the network. So what made our program so successful? It's building on the base that we had in 23 and keeping those volunteers engaged, recruiting the liaisons. Virginia has over 100 voter protection liaisons. And it's not only about playing defense, as Tram said, on election day, making sure folks can go in and vote, but it's playing offense. It's about expanding access, educating folks to their voting options, which are good in Virginia, but also fighting on the local level to expand access for additional early vote sites. I'm going to wrap up with one quick example. Our voter protection liaison in Montgomery County helped and worked with the local coalition to have an additional early vote site at Virginia Tech, so college students could have walkable access to a voting site rather than taking a car that they might not have or public transportation that might not exist. And so it's not only about playing defense, but I think starting early, you can play offense and educate folks and work to expand access. And that happens now. So really looking forward to your questions. So thankful to be here, and I will toss it back to Quentin/Jesse.
Thank you so much, Nico. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Tram. And now I'm going to turn over the mic to my colleague, Jesse Littlewood, who's the Executive Director of the Voter Protection Corps, who will moderate the chat and also highlight some of the ways that folks can get involved with our efforts in 2025. Jesse?
Thank you, Quentin. And I just want to highlight the fact that there's 90 folks here, a lot of momentum leading into the importance of the right to vote and the necessity of ensuring every eligible voter is able to participate. It gives me hope and energy, both from our panelists, but also from everyone who's here as well. I'm going to invite folks to leave into the chat any additional questions that they want to ask. I'll start moderating them. And while you're generating them, I'm going to put up a quick poll. At Voter Protection Corps, one of our roles here is to help do this catalytic kickstarting of some of the important conversations and the necessary gathering of energy for voter protection efforts. We have a plan to continue to have these important conversations roughly once a month. And so I'd like folks to inform us what are the types of activities and types of conversations they would like to see. So up on your screen, there should be a poll asking you to select any and all that interest you of what next topics we might convene a conversation of voter protection experts from both the partisan side, but also the nonpartisan work that's out there, as well as experts in other fields like cybersecurity or others. So the topics that folks may select, all the ones you're interested in, include election cybersecurity and hacking threats, generative artificial intelligence like ChatGPT, et cetera, and how it would play out into the elections, how to prevent mis and disinformation in our elections, the additional impacts the Trump administration may have in the 2025 and 2026 elections, the efforts that happen on the statewide efforts to recruit, train, and deploy election monitors, and one other topic would be issue spotting and resolving election administration problems before Election Day. If there's a topic that's not listed, please enter it into the second question there and select all that are of interest to you. As you fill that out, I'm going to give folks a few more minutes, but I am going to go hop over to our first set of questions. And we're going to start with Justin. There's a couple of questions, Justin, in the chat around you said it was illegal what the Trump administration, the Trump executive order purports to do. So what? What if there's attempts to do it anyway? And there's a couple of very specific questions here. The category is, might the president still try and use his levers of power, even if it's illegal, to further the aims? And what recourse would we have? So in particular, what's to prevent Trump from firing Democratic members of the Election Assistance Commission, leading potentially changes to the federal voter registration process? In those scenarios, if the courts are where the battle plays out, what faith do you have in the courts, and what can we, the people, do to ensure that we have a pro-voter and pro-democracy result for those kinds of challenges? So that's a big set of questions, but I think you can handle it. We're going to hand it over to you. And thanks again, everyone, for filling out the poll.
Yeah, so that's a great set of questions. And I think I'll start with the end on what we can do before I get to the rest of it, in part because I think they're very related. Don't give orders any power that they don't legally have by pretending they have power that doesn't belong to them. If I wrote a command to a state election official, a local election official on a Burger King receipt and handed it over with a flourish of trumpets, people would politely escort me to the exit of the building and throw the receipt in the trash, because I don't have any power to tell them what to do. And it doesn't matter if I wrote that same order on a big shiny piece of paper with a big wax seal, still don't have any power to tell them what to do. Still the same result. The fact that it's the president of the United States issuing a thing on a big shiny piece of paper with a wax seal, or metaphorically, confuses people into thinking that they have an obligation to respond to him when they wouldn't have an obligation to respond to me. And I think the best thing we can do is not act as if the fact that the president said it makes it legal. And I think that means educating local election officials, exactly as VPC does, as many people are doing, about what legal responsibilities they have, and what legal responsibilities they can't go along with under their own state laws, which are set up to comply with actual federal law and not just vibes. So it's reminding people that there's a difference between vibes and actual legally operative things. Do I have faith in the courts? So far. Actually, I'll start before that. Do we think that Trump won't try to impose his will in a way that is unlawful or not authorized by law? Absolutely, yes. You don't have to have been paying much attention since January 20th to see lots of places where that's happened already. And I think that the levers of power, the effect of those varies with the levers of power that he's got. In some instances, he has control over a funding stream that are causing people to pay attention even when what he's alleging is not lawful. Doesn't have that here. I've been advocating for decades for Congress to actually give real money to funding elections. And unfortunately, so far they haven't listened to me, which means that the amount of election money on the stake from the feds is very, very, very small. And his threat to cut off funding if people don't do what he says is equivalent to the threat of taking a nickel away from you, which is to say, fine. So the main lever that he's had in some of the other arenas have been funding. And he simply doesn't have, he can turn the spigot on or off, but the spigot is just a trickle. And so it doesn't really matter. He can direct the Department of Justice to file a lawsuit or to begin an investigation. But the thing about legal proceedings, the thing about the Department of Justice is their power only exists in as much as courts want to buy what they're selling. The Department of Justice filing a lawsuit obligates lawyers to respond, and that can drain budget from small elections offices or the like. So I don't want to say it's inconsequential, but the president can't exert his authority here through the DOJ without a court actually buying that there's legal authority there. And this leads to the third part of the question is, are the courts buying this? Are the courts pushing back? And the answer is so far, yes. The courts have not, I think, done everything I would have liked, and I've not agreed with every decision the courts have made. But so far, the one common factor in Article 3, it appears to be the only functional branch left at the moment. The one common factor is that courts have acted like courts. They have actually looked at the law. They've actually demanded facts. Even the Supreme Court, which is behaving least like a court in this current moment, even the Supreme Court has by and large given lower courts the authority to do what lower courts do. And even when I haven't agreed with every possible resolution, lower courts are behaving quite well, actually, particularly compared to some of their other peers. Giant exception and asterisk for the state just to the south. The North Carolina State Supreme Court is acting extremely poorly right now. Their work is getting reviewed by federal courts that I think will be acting better. And so the short version is, I think the courts will continue to uphold, if not my version of what the law looks like, at least a pretty close facsimile of a version of what the law looks like, which I think is all to the benefit. As for the real consequences, we're about to see a showdown there. I think it's likely to come from the Abrego Garcia case out of Maryland. We'll know by the end of 2 weeks from today what the courts are willing to do to enforce their authority. And I want to point out to everybody that I don't relish it coming to this showdown. But if the administration forces one, the federal courts have immense authority to bankrupt real individuals, and that clarifies the mind real quickly. If they choose to use it, they can actually coerce the executive into following the law. And so I don't think you should count out the possibility that the courts will actually not save us. We got to save us, right? It's going to take organizing. It's going to take supporting the courts. It's going to take informing election officials. There's a lot of work that is not court dependent. But in terms of laying out the basics of what it is local officials do and don't have to do in order to administer the elections coming up, I have faith that the courts will sort out what's legal from what's not fairly reliably. Or at least I haven't seen anything yet to indicate that's not the case.
Thanks, Justin. That is a very comprehensive and helpful answer. I'm also going to encourage folks in the chat, as well as our panelists, to offer any suggestions of some of the vehicles, the organizations, or projects that are happening that will help we the people take those kinds of pro-democracy actions, help ensure that we are buttressing our democratic institutions like the courts. I'm going to go to the next question, but before we do that, I'll just end our poll really quickly and let folks see the kind of interest that we have in the next conversation to have. I just want to give a moment of appreciation to folks who are interested in the last two questions, which are typically not as highlighted in voter protection conversations, but the efforts to recruit, train, and deploy election monitors and issue spotting and resolving election administration problems before election day. It warms my heart to see that kind of very specific and important work elevated from this crowd. So thank you for that. I want to turn to a couple of questions to Tram and Nico. There's some good questions that people have in the chat about some specific Virginia work. So I think I want to ask two questions to both of you. One is from Rose. What are we doing in Virginia to make sure that poll workers are not bad actors? And what is the potential sort of insider risk of election administration and partisan interference in the elections? And then secondly, I think there's a good question here about that Michael asked about Virginia election officials doing anything significant in response to the executive order. So those are two questions specific to Virginia. I'll let you take it from here. Tram first, maybe, and then Nico, over to you.
Sure. Appreciate the questions. Hi, Rose. Good to see you on here. So I mean, I think for one, I have a whole lot of faith in our local registrars and their ability to train up our election officers and to make sure that they aren't bad actors. That being said, there have been bad actors, right, that have been trained up as election officials and have worked the polls as election officials. I think one of the things that has been successful, and thank you, Nico, and the Democratic Party for being a big part of this, is that the state code allows party representatives and campaign representatives to be inside the polling place monitoring. And so like for a group like ours, that's third party, we're not necessarily allowed to have our volunteers, our monitors inside the polling place. Most of our organizations, whether it's a volunteer grassroots organization, the 866 hour vote election protection crew, et cetera, we're all on the outside, right? Within like outside of the perimeter. But the party and candidates can have inside poll monitors, and they are the eyes and ears on the ground so that when there is an election official who is checking in voters, for example, and there's something funky going on, those inside poll monitors are able to raise the issue, right, with the chief election officer in that precinct. We're able to escalate to the local registrar. We're able to escalate to the State Board of Elections. And so there are things that we can do in place, but that's also why, like, when we think about election protection holistically, there's a role that is important for all of the different types of organizations to play, whether it's partisan party candidate or a third party nonpartisan effort. So I think that's one piece of it. The other thing I'll say is that I don't remember exactly what year it was, maybe like 14 years ago, I worked with Delegate Mark Sickles on putting in a bill that got passed and signed into law that at least would standardize the training and the certification that election officers across the entire state would have to go through in order to be an election officer. That needs a little bit of an update. So to Nico's point, the next governor and her actually will have a female governor no matter what. Her administration, her Commission of Elections can always re-up those training materials and make sure that, in that process, we are making sure that our election officers are not bad actors. So that's like my answer to the first question. I can't remember your second question anymore because my brain just So you
Sure,
can
let me ask one quick follow-up that came up in the chat, which is, can people sign up to serve as election officers? Would you
absolutely.
recommend that? And what's the process for that?
Absolutely. I think every registrar in the state would say that they are constantly looking for people to sign up to be election officers. So it's very easy to do. If you update, it's on the voter registration form. So if you're registering to vote for the first time or you're updating it, there's a box that you can check. You can go to the local registrar's office and sign up. Virginia code requires, and I put it in quotes requires because it also says to the extent practicable. And so that sort of gives a little bit of wiggle room that every locality has an equal number of election officers that represent both of the parties or independent, right? And so like there's always going to be some sort of balance. It's tricky because we don't register by party. And so it's sort of like more of an art than it is like a technical science here, but I encourage everybody to sign up to be election officers. And we particularly need bilingual election officers, especially in Northern Virginia, whether it's Spanish speaking, Korean, Vietnamese. We have some languages that are really prevalent in certain areas of the state that need election officers.
Yeah, I would just build on that by saying 100%. Like one quick action item: if you live here in Virginia, sign up to be an election official. That's hugely, hugely helpful. To Rose's point, hi Rose. I would say it is a concern. By the Virginia code, the local committee, whether that's on the Republican side or Democratic, submits 3 names to the local judge, and then that judge will then select among those to be on the electoral board. And then from there flows a lot of power. So there's a lot of potential for malfeasance here. One, pretty amazing example occurred last summer where the local registrar shared sensitive information with the local chair of the same party. So it's really important to have folks, those inside poll observers, be there, have folks, whether they're liaisons or just members of the community, going to the electoral board and staying engaged and informed about what's happening in their community, because there is definitely potential for abuse here. Again, sign up to be an election official if you live in Virginia. There were 20,000 officers of election needed last year, given the 45 days in the primary and then the 45 days plus election day. So please sign up to be an election official if you haven't already. And, saving that, also serving as a poll observer for a nonpartisan or a partisan function is a great way to stop bad actors in real time.
Jesse, I remembered the second question now. It's the executive order and what local officials are doing about it. Right. Okay, good. So the day that executive order came out, I immediately sent it to a bunch of the folks that I know in the election administration world in Virginia. And I've had conversations too with folks at the Department of Elections to try to understand like what this Youngkin administration might be doing in relation to this executive order. The EO is related to federal elections. We have state elections this year. And my whole thought process was, okay, what are some of the pieces in the federal EO that we might see pop up in Virginia and Virginia's elections this year? The good news is that Virginia has some state laws already on the books that would prevent, hopefully prevent, folks from trying to do some of the things that EO spells out. For example, we have a law on the books in Virginia that allows for absentee ballots to be counted as long as they are postmarked on or before election day up to noon on the Friday after the election. That is in our state code, right? And so if that is to be a thing where the Youngkin administration orders, all of the local registrars, the State Board of Elections says, you're not going to do that. We also have a venue in our state court system, right, to sue because that violates state code. And so I took a look at that EO. I agree with Justin. Like it is like, there's so many things that are sort of unlawful in there in both state and federal law that we have tools in our toolbox and we're constantly monitoring it. And frankly, I'm keeping my powder dry in terms of thinking through like what are the scenarios that come up that we might have to pursue potential litigation down the road in the state court system. Some of the things in there that sort of keep me up at night, for example, the EO says that if you're not a US citizen, you can't touch election administration at all in any aspect. And I'm sitting here like, well, there are staff people that touch election administration in every local registrar's office just by purely being a staff person, right? Like if you're in an administrative function, okay, like they are, valid employees. They've got, green card status, legal permanent residence. They might not be US citizens. Like, what if that ends up being something that people try to enforce here? That could completely upend election administration in the non-sexy way, right? It's like not something that people are really paying attention to, but at its core could fundamentally really screw up our elections. And so those are some of the things that like I've been thinking through and things that keep me up at night as if I don't have enough things to keep me up at night. But we're definitely talking to a lot of local election officials and state level officials just to sort of make sure that things are, we're going to be okay here for 2025.
And can I add
Thank you.
30 seconds onto that, Jesse?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just really quickly, what Tram just highlighted is the power of actually talking to election officials, to state officials, putting this stuff out in the public so that people understand the resistance to it long before suing. So she's absolutely right. There are real good tools if we need them in the courts, but it's always more effective to stave that off, to not have to rely on the courts. And having conversations with people across the state, across the country, and letting, when elections officials hear it from you all, believe it or not, they listen. When they hear that these sorts of changes that they don't have to make, they shouldn't make, they listen. And so not everyone all the time, but most of them most of the time. And so it's really important to bolster any potential court work with old-fashioned advocacy, right? Talking to people in positions of power with the ability to do stuff is far more effective on the front end. And it's part of why VPC exists, frankly. And it's why a whole lot of other organizations get involved well before the election in order to make sure that stuff happens.
Awesome. I want to highlight a little bit of our next steps as we're running low on time. To Justin's point, Tram, if you would be willing, if you have a couple of recommendations for organizations that people might be able to participate in to do some of that engagement and advocacy, that could be really valuable at this point. I want to thank everyone who has joined us and spoken tonight. And we'll have one last question after this, but I wanted to just highlight some key next steps that folks can continue to take to support Voter Protection Corps and our work focusing on Virginia as Quentin put it, the election of importance and consequence, but also the canary in the coal mine for 2025. So the first is we have a National Voter Protection Corps roster where if you're a volunteer or you've got legal skills or you've been involved in voter protection in the past or you're interested in being involved in voter protection in the future, let us know your information and we will make sure that we forward you on some of the most critical and important opportunities in a way that hopefully makes the best use of your skills and abilities. The second is a pitch for contributions. We have a small budget that we're hoping to raise right now. We are an all-volunteer operation, and we are hoping to raise some resources that allow us to put even more effort into our work in Virginia. So contributions of any level really make an impact. Would love if folks are able to during this call make a small contribution or a large one. It would be deeply appreciated and give us the resources we need to protect voters in Virginia and beyond. You can visit our website for more information, or you can contact me if you have additional questions. So those are up on the screen and in the chat as well. I think my last question we have for tonight has to do with one of the first things that came up about voter protection in Virginia and other states, which is the boom and bust cycle. So, Kathleen mentioned this in the chat, and I think it does appear to many that we sort of reinvent some of our election protection operations. Given the importance of the upcoming election November 4th in Virginia, is one way to think about this as a practice run on how to recruit, train, and deploy great people who would be available in other contexts, or the kinds of threats that we can expect to experience in 2026 as well. Would it be useful to have better funding for voter protection staff or volunteers, or better data collection, and how better to deploy those volunteers? So what can we do to make a stronger program and change some of the challenges that come with surge capacity and then reducing that and trying to go back. I'm going to ask that Tram, Nico, and Quentin close us out with that question, and we'll hand it over to you. So anyone who wants to jump in first on that, feel free to. All right, Nico, we'll go to you. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I was always going to defer to Tram, but happy to take that. I mean, I think it does involve some paid full-time staff to do this work on a permanent basis. But more than that, I think volunteering, engaging, staffing hotlines is really important as well. But I think of it as like a scaffolding. If we can build a stronger structure by the time folks surge in those last 2 to 3 weeks or 2 to 3 months, they're going to be better used and have a better volunteer experience if there's a superstructure there to support their work rather than maybe falling through the cracks. And so I see some wonderful volunteers here tonight, and that is wonderful. But if I was to say one thing, I would say full-time staff or a staff member would be a good start.
Tram, why don't you go next and I'll close it out.
That's fine. I don't know if I have a whole lot to add. I mean, I think, part of it is making sure that, part of making sure that volunteers continue to be engaged year round is, to just Nico's point, having the capacity to maintain and be in relationship with volunteers, right? It's hard to continue to be in relationship if you don't have the capacity to engage even if there's nothing to do at the moment, right? You still have to be engaged and in conversation to maintain that relationship. So I think that's really, really important. I'm going to put in the chat box 2 emails, my non-New Virginia majority email for partisan opportunities. Nico's right. There isn't a staff voter protection effort in the Democratic Party of Virginia at the moment. I am on the party steering committee. I am meeting with the new chair of the Democratic Party this week to talk about these things. So you can reach out to me at wearing my non-New Virginia majority hat for party things, at least at the moment. And then I'll put in an email address for my colleague, Matt Butler, who can plug folks into all of the nonpartisan election protection efforts through our coalition that includes both state and national partners in the state. So feel free to reach out. And I mean, I believe in year-round work all the time. That's why I do what I do. And so I appreciate that question a lot.
Thank you, Tram. Thank you, Nico. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Jesse. Thanks to all of you for joining us here today and for your engagement in protecting the vote. Really appreciate your time. I thought this was a terrific conversation. There is lots to do. The Voter Protection Corps would love it if you would reach out to me and Jesse. We have work to do to lay the groundwork. We have research. We have volunteer activities. There's ways that you can help us to do this year-round work and also to support these Virginia elections. One of the things that I feel, sort of with this deluge of information, that's very easy to get disheartened about some of the attacks on our democracy. And what I would really encourage folks to do is to do something. And one of the things that I think we can do is protect the vote and protect the vote in Virginia, and use this as a place where we can make a stand in favor of democracy. So we'd love to work with you, leverage this terrific community to help people like Tram, people like Nico, support the work on the ground in Virginia, and help make sure that we have a free and fair election in 2025. And that we build from that to what I think is going to be one of the most important elections in the history of our democracy, which is the 2026 cycle. I think if we can't protect the vote, if that election is not free and fair, that they're really big obstacles for our democracy. I think this is the time to do something, and working to support our free and fair elections is a really important and valuable public service. So thank you for joining us. Please stay in touch. We will put a version of this presentation up on YouTube, and we encourage you to stay in touch. I think Jesse put in the chat some of the ways that you can communicate with Voter Protection Corps. We are so grateful for your work and appreciate the conversation. Thank you all, and good night.